Hey guys, this is Illusion PODFIC, and today we're going to be reading Insane and Not Insane, that is the question, by Alright, What's This Then? This is Chapter 3. The gala was insufferable, as Tim had anticipated. Gotham's elites had gathered in the grand ballroom of Wayne Foundation Hall, their laughter echoing off marble walls, crystal chandeliers casting fractured light over polished floors. Tim adjusted his bow tie for the third time, resisting the urge to tug at the constricting collar. The gala was a charity event. Technically. One of those nebulous, fund-the-future kind of deals. In practice, it was a breeding ground for influence peddling and whispered secrets. Somewhere in the middle of all that shine, their target was hiding. The mission was straightforward. Monitor key figures suspected of the involvement in a burgeoning drug trafficking ring. The bats were scattered across Gotham, each pursuing a lead in their own way. Tim, however, had drawn the short straw, forcing him to attend this insufferable event under the guise of the dutiful heir of Wayne Enterprise. "Try not to look like you want to die," came Jake's voice in his ear. "You're supposed to be networking." "I'm trying to identify a trafficker, not land a modeling contract." "Could do both," Steph chimed in. "You're wearing that suit like a threat." "Focus," Bruce cut in. "No nickname, no warmth, just steel." Tim didn't respond. He didn't need to. The past few days had been tense. It had started quietly, just a headline or two. Families of the Joker's victims filing a joint lawsuit, demanding a full psychiatric evaluation. Not from Arkham. Not from the usual parade of underqualified staff psychiatrists whose assessments were rubber-stamped and sealed away. They wanted something real, something admissible, a formal determination of legal sanity, of criminal responsibility. At first, Bruce had dismissed it as symbolic, a media stunt, a grief-fueled attempt at closure in a city that rarely offered any. But then it picked up steam. A judge approved the motion. A federal liaison got involved. A storm started gathering over Gotham, and over Batman. Now the case was everywhere. Front pages, talk shows, the GCPD was under fire for never filing proper charges. Arkham was being dissected in editorials, but the worst of it? People were turning on the bats. The city was asking the questions Bruce had avoided for years. Why does Batman keep letting him get away with it? Why Arkham, when it might as well be a revolving door? And, most potent, what will it take for Batman to finally put a stop to the Joker once and for all? And really, there were no good answers. As a result, they were all tense, short-tempered, fractured in a way they hadn't been in a long time. Stephanie had snapped at Cass 2 nights ago over something as dumb as comm static. Damien nearly bit Dick's head off during patrol. Tim picked a fight with Barbara over a drone placement and regretted it the second the words left his mouth. But no one was more on edge than Bruce. Bruce had gone quiet in that dangerous way, like a tide pulling back from a tsunami. He hadn't been able to stop the motion in court, couldn't shut down the media coverage without making it worse. Couldn't growl and put pressure on the right people as Batman to make it all go away quietly. For once, he was completely helpless as both Bruce Wayne and Batman, and it was eating him alive. They'd seen it, the late nights, the clenched jaws, the way he stood too long at the case in the cave. Jason's old suit and glass, still lit like a shrine. For the first time in a long time, Batman couldn't fix it, and Gotham knew it. Worse, Crime Alley knew it. The place Jason had once ruled now buzzed with tension. The streets were full of whispers. Protests had started near Robinson Park and crept outward. Not anti-Batman, not yet, but close. People remembered the kids the Red Hood had protected, the shelters he'd stalked, the rules he had enforced when the cops looked the other way. They remembered that even as Red Hood, he'd given a damn when no one else had. And now they saw Batman standing in the way of something that looked like justice. It felt like the whole city was holding its breath, waiting. And none of them had any idea what came next. A glass shattered somewhere across the room, effectively pulling Tim from his thoughts. Laughter followed. Tim turned towards the sound and froze. There, 20 feet away, a man stood near the bar, tall and still and maddeningly familiar. He was in a tailored suit, hair longer, curls soft around his temples. He held a drink in one hand and the other tucked in his pocket, calm, composed. "Oh my God!" Tim gasped before he was able to stop himself. A few people nearby sent him questioning looks. So much for being inconspicuous. "Red Robin?" Bruce's voice crackled in his ears. Status. A beat passed. Red Robin, come in. But Tim couldn't hear him. Not really. The static in his ears was too loud. He inched closer. He found himself unable to tear his eyes away from the ghost across the room. Tim had conflicted feelings about Jason Todd. Jason was, and still is, his Robin. Not the one he'd worked with, the one he'd inherited, admired. The legend he could never quite live up to. His death had hung over Tim like a warning bell, a shadow cast over the yellow stitching of his tunic. And even if he hadn't known him back then, it had devastated him. More than that, he had watched it hollow the family out. He had watched as Bruce had shattered and broken beyond repair. Not in the dramatic way you'd expect from a man like Bruce Wayne. No spiraling or collapse, just a slow, methodical shutting down. Piece by piece, wall by wall. He stopped letting people in, stopped listening, stopped trusting his own judgment. Every mission became a desperate attempt to prove something. Tim never figured out what. That he could still save people? That he deserved to? That he hadn't failed Jason? Then there was Dick. Everyone always said he was the light to Bruce's darkness, but after Jason's death, even that light flickered. Tim hadn't known him before that, but it was obvious something vital had cracked in him. He'd left Gotham, picked fights, avoided the cave like it carried ghosts. The way he talked about Jason was always strained, full of regret, confusion, grief he never knew quite what to do with. Like a brother who lost his chance to be a brother. Alfred never talked about it much, but his grief lived in the quiet spaces, extra servings left on the trays, the faintest hesitations when he passed the memorial in the cave, the way he never corrected Bruce when he made decisions that were clearly wrong, as if arguing might break something delicate that had only barely been stitched back together. The grief in the manor had been thick, heavy, ever-present. It was like the foundation of the place had cracked, and Tim, still new, still learning where he fit, had walked carefully around the hole Jason had left, and then he came back. And he came back angry. Red Hood had been a nightmare, spit and fury and bloodshed, and some of it had been aimed directly at Tim, at the boy who'd taken his place, who wore his colors. It had shaken Tim, shattered the heroic image he had of Jason in his head. A small, resentful part of him had privately thought that it would have been better if Jason had just stayed dead. He'd regretted the thought as soon as he had it, even more so after they'd learned the gruesome details of Jason's resurrection, captivity by the League of Assassins, and dipped in the Lazarus pit. Because, even back then, in between all the bloodshed, pain, and anger, Tim had seen glimpses, not just of what Jason had been, but of who he still was underneath the rage. He saw the Robin who grew up in Crime Alley and never really left it, the one who protected the people the system didn't, who gave shelter to homeless kids, who watched out for the working girls and enforced rules so no child ever touched a needle. The kind of crime lord who handed out food and antibiotics like it was war ration, who ruled like he was trying to fix something because he was. Quietly, Tim had wondered what it would be like if he came home. If the ghost he'd been chasing because a brother in truth, not just a name, what would it be like to have that fierce protectiveness aimed his way? To really know the boy whose name still cracked something in Bruce's voice. The one who lived so loudly in Dick's stories and Alfred's silences. Despite it all, Tim had hoped. And then, something broke between Jason and Bruce, badly. And Jason disappeared, vanished like smoke. Left nothing behind but more silence and grief, and the unspoken fear that they'd lost him for good. Once more, Jason's name became sacred and untouched in the manor. Too painful to say, too loud to ignore, every time it came up. It turned into a battlefield, blame, guilt, grief. Only Jason never said his name without flinching, but even he carried the weight of it in his bones. Tim had spent the past 8 years walking through a house haunted by someone who wasn't dead. And now that ghost was here, at a gala, in a tailored suit, talking like no time had passed. His breath caught before he'd even realized he'd stopped breathing. Jason? He gasped, the name barely audible under the hum of the crowd, but thunderous in his own ears. He didn't mean to say it aloud, but the name slipped out, soft, stunned, like it had been crawling at the back of his throat for years and finally found air. Immediately, the comms exploded. Tim? Barbara's voice spiked urgent. Say that again. What did you say? What the actual hell? Steph hissed. Somewhere on her end, something metallic clattered to the floor. There was a crack over the comms. Wood splintering? A snapped landing, maybe? Shit, Tim, confirm. Dick barked, wind whipping across his mic. Did you just say Jason? Wait, came Damien's voice, clipped and scornful, like he thought it was a joke, but he couldn't risk assuming. Drake, explain yourself now. I don't have visual, Barbara snapped again. Tim, I need your eyes. What do you see? When he didn't answer, Bruce barked. Someone get me security footage. Tim, confirm now. But Tim couldn't hear them. Not really. Because Jason was moving, smiling, shaking hands with someone from the mayor's office like he did this sort of thing all the time. Like he wasn't a ghost wearing a new skin. He looked different. Gone was the angry young man consumed by vengeance. In his place stood someone composed, confident. His suit was impeccable, his posture relaxed, yet there was an edge to him. A quiet intensity that hadn't faded. Tim stared forward before he could stop himself. Jason turned just as he reached him. Their eyes met. And for a second, the room was silent. Hey, Tim, Jason said nonchalantly, like they were old colleagues, not old ghosts. His eyes were less acid green and more turquoise than the last time they'd seen him, Tim noted distantly. You're alive, he said, still processing. Where have you been? Around, Jason replied cryptically. It's a long story. Obviously. Tim wanted to ask a million questions. Where have you been? Why did you leave? Why didn't you ever text straight or call? But before he could make sense of the 1,000 thoughts clamoring in his head, a sharp voice cut cleanly through the noise. Dr. Todd? Tim blinked. Doctor? He turned instinctively towards the source of the voice. A man in a pressed charcoal suit had stepped forward from the mingling crowd. Mid-50s, maybe, clean-shaven, and polished in a way that screamed academia. The kind of man who knew how to slip into a room without drawing attention, until he wanted it. Jason didn't flinch. He turned his head slowly, that unreadable calm still fixed on his face, and offered the man a polite nod. Yes? Tim's brain hiccuped. Jason just answered to it. Dr. Todd, like it belonged to him. Like it wasn't something stolen. Like it wasn't surreal. I'm glad I found you, the man said. The others are eager to meet you. Please, follow me. And just like that, Jason was gone, following the suit through the crowd, swallowed up by the glittering crush of tuxedos and champagne. Tim didn't hesitate. As soon as Jason disappeared into the crowd, Tim moved. Not running. He couldn't afford that kind of attention, but fast enough to draw a confused glance from waitstaff weaving between flutes of champagne and trays of caviar. He slipped around a laughing couple, brushed past a senator he vaguely recognized, and scanned every corner of the room for that familiar silhouette. Tim caught a sight of Jason near the far wall, framed by warm light, in a towering arrangement of orchids. He was standing with a small group, 4, maybe 5 people, clearly professional, likely scientists and other academics. They were older, just in a subtle kind of way that said they belonged to the kind of circles Tim had usually had to bluff his way into. Jason fit in. He stood relaxed, hands in his pockets, nodding as one of the women laughed at something he'd said. Another man clapped him on the back. Tim couldn't hear the words, but the body language said enough. Respect, camaraderie, comfort. No one looked remotely suspicious of him. No one looked at him like they were talking to Gotham's most infamous prodigal son. Tim was still threading his way forward when someone stepped into his path. A tall woman with a wineglass and an eager expression. Oh, you're the wine kid, right, Timothy? I was hoping to ask you about your work with... I'm sorry, excuse me, Tim said quickly, sidestepping her with a mumbled apology. By the time he looked up again, Jason was gone. He turned in a slow cycle, scanning every cluster of guests, every open doorway. Nothing. No red helmet. No black text. No ghost in plain sight. Damn it, he muttered under his breath. His calm crackled. Red Robin, came Bruce's voice, low and tight with strain. Apparently, he had regained his composure enough to remember there are no names in the field rule. Report. Finally, Tim pressed a hand to his ear. It's him, Jason. He's still alive. He's here. I lost him in the crowd. Silence. Are you sure it was him? Barbara asked after a moment, skeptically. I didn't imagine it, Tim said, trying to keep his voice steady. It was him. He spoke to me. People were calling him Dr. Todd. He's pretending to be a doctor? Damien sounded insulted. And you lost him? Steph asked incredulously. What the hell, dude? It's not like I can just chase him down, Tim replied hotly. I had to be subtle. You might remember that I'm at a gala with like 200 people on my at. Everyone stand down, Bruce said, cutting across the chaos. His voice was stale. Missions are suspended. Return to the cave. Now. That, in itself, showed just how much Bruce himself was affected by the events of the night. No matter how hard he tried to hide it, the mission always came first. Then again, Jason had always been a bit of a blind spot for all of them. But, Steph started. Now. Tim exhaled and looked around the ballroom one more time. Jason had disappeared again, but not as a ghost. Not this time. This time, he walked out the front door with a name badge, a degree, and a room full of people who respected him. And not a single one of them knew who he really was. The cave was buzzing by the time Tim got back. Boots echoed across stone and metal as the others filtered in. Some still in armor, some already half out of it. But every single one of them tense, raw-edged, and itching for answers. Tim barely made it down the steps from the entrance platform before the questions began. Start talking, Steph said, ripping off her mask. You're sure it was him? Dick asked, pacing. Where exactly did you lose him? Barbara, calm but alert, as always. Tim pulled off his jacket with slow, deliberate motions, trying to get his heartbeat to slow. It was Jason. I know what I saw. He said my name. He looked right at me. And then, Damien demanded, arms crossed. Still in his armor, hood half drawn over his eyes, he disappeared into a group of people. Looked like academics, professionals. They knew him, laughed with him, called him Dr. Todd. That silenced them for a beat. Stephanie was the first to break it. Jason Todd, she repeated slowly, is back in Gotham and attending galas as a doctor. Bruce hadn't said a word. He was standing in front of the back computer, unmoving, like a stone, but Tim could see the tension in his shoulders, braced, held. Like he'd been holding his breath for years. It was Dick who voiced what they were all thinking. This can't be a coincidence. What? Tim asked, though he already knew. The family suing, the demand for a real psychiatric evaluation of the Joker, Gotham turning on us, and now Jason shows up looking like he walked off the cover of a medical journal? Cass nodded once. He knew, or planned this. Steph frowned. But why? After 8 years of silence? Before anyone could answer, the hydraulic doors to the cave hissed open, and Alfred descended the stairs. Polished as always, despite the hour. I believe you are quite right, Mr. Richard, he said, his voice perfectly calm. He was holding a folded copy of the Gotham Gazette in one gloved hand. With quiet ceremony, he laid it across the nearest table. The headline spanned the entire front page. World-renowned forensic psychiatrist appointed to Joker case. Gotham's own Dr. Jason Todd to lead psychological evaluation at Arkham Asylum. Another beat of silence passed. Holy shit, Tim thought. Alright guys, and that's the end of chapter 3 of Insane or Not Insane. That is the question by Alright, what's all this then? I hope you guys liked it, and I'll see you next chapter.